Hello everyone, welcome, my name is Phoenix and this is the Consumer's Guide to Filmmaking. Adolescence, 2025, Jack Thorne, Stephen Graham, and Philip Barantini. This series follows the Miller family. In particular, it follows one Jamie Miller. One morning, Jamie is arrested on the charge of murder. As he is processed and interrogated, details emerge about the grisly incident. Now, with the full extent of his crimes known, the rest of the Millers, in particular Jamie's father Eddie, must come to terms with why and how this could have ever happened. I had heard some great things about this series going around the grapevine, but I became truly interested when I heard Philip Barantini was directing it. Now, I think this series is good in many ways, but in others it leaves me wanting for more. The reason Barantini's involvement was so interesting was because Barantini is a big fan of the one-shot gimmick. His other movie that I have seen, Boiling Point, was a one-shot film, and much like that, every episode of this series is a oneer. Now, doing a oneer is no easy feat. It takes incredible amounts of coordination to pull off. One mistake, it's back to the beginning. In my eyes, Adolescence is a big improvement on Boiling Point in terms of how Barantini presented the oneer. The way he improved this is through the blocking. In Boiling Point, I found it was way too obvious as to when the camera was leaving the area in order for the crew to set up the next section of the movie. In this, the reasons for the camera's movement result in the story moving in a more seamless manner. When a conversation ends, there is always an impetus which leads to another equally important conversation. Everything moved the plot forward, so the camera was always on something that truly mattered. The oneer gimmick is not the only thing I liked about this series. One of the other elements that struck me was the music. It was incredibly droning, atmospheric, and minimal. When it was used, it enhanced emotional moments or enhanced the sound design throughout this series. There were also two licensed songs used in the series, and that's it. One was a choir version of Sting's Fragile. This song, in the context of that episode, was honestly really haunting. It was really well used. The other, a song called Through the Eyes of a Child by Aurora, was lyrically on the nose, but not so much that it was ham-fisted. It was a nice song that really hammered home the themes of the story at the ending. Speaking of the story, there is a lot to admire about the scripts by Jack Thorne and star Stephen Graham. In combination with the acting, it could handle really emotional and harrowing moments with such subtlety. Episodes 2 and 3, while I will discuss my issues with the writing in a bit, are incredibly presented. Add to that, at 4 episodes and a total runtime of about 4 hours, this series blew by so quickly. You could burn through it in a single evening. However, I feel like there is a disservice being done to the topics this series is covering. Past episode 1, which quickly lets you know that this kid is a fucking murderer, and that is something I really dug in terms of structuring, we start discussing the dreaded subject of toxic masculinity. Now, I think that the subject of masculinity in the 21st century, especially within the past 5 to 10 years, is a subject worth discussing. It's a genuinely multifaceted issue where there are a ton of salient points being made by tons of people from both sides of the political spectrum. But I think with this series, it had a bad tendency to devolve into just after-school special levels of corn and cheese. Episode 2 was an interesting examination of the modern school system and how that environment can exacerbate these issues. Episode 3, while there were interesting intentions behind it, it came off more like lol, this kid's a dirty incel, more than this lonely kid lashed out at a society that was bombarding him with so much information he couldn't make heads or tails of it. Episode 4, while phenomenally acted, the monologue Stephen Graham gave could come off as really cheesy, and further lacks some of the nuance that this subject truly deserves. Regardless of my issues with the writing, I found the acting to be top-notch. In our lead role of Eddie, we have series co-writer and creator Stephen Graham. One of acting's biggest workhorses, Graham was absolutely crushing it in every scene. As I alluded to earlier, the really meaty emotional scenes were performed with such grace and subtlety. The scene where his son is exposed as the killer was absolutely gut-wrenching, and despite the cheese, his performance in the closing episode was honestly phenomenal. As his son Jamie, we have young Owen Cooper. This kid was absolutely incredible, and it was his first fucking performance in a major production. While all the praise understandably, and some would say justifiably, would go towards his performance in episode 3, I think his performance in episode 1 is equally deserving of admiration. The way those big emotions in episode 1 built, and built, until the final scene was the work of an actor just beyond his years. In an underrated performance in this series, Christine Tremarco plays wife Amanda, and she is absolutely equal to these superb performances in every way. Her moment to shine was in episode 4 and her scenes with Stephen Graham. While not immune to the cheese of that particular final scene, her subtle emotional display was just on point. That subtlety was also on display during Stephen Graham's crash out at the hardware store. The face of sheer fucking heartbreak she was making during the car ride home was absolutely fucking painful to look at. In conclusion, I do believe there is a ton to admire about Adolescence. Barantini refined his gimmick to the point where this might be considered his finest work so far. Tension and atmosphere abound through his direction, especially in the audio and music department. As a written story, I do believe it isn't where it needs to be, as its thematic discussion was inconsistent in messaging and effectiveness. But that is more than compensated for by its relentless pace and absolutely phenomenal performances, especially from Graham and Cooper. If you can spare an evening for it, definitely throw this on as sort of a long movie night sort of thing. Recommended. And I am feeling an 8.5 out of 10 on this one. Maybe that's a little generous given what I've said about it, but it's really well made and really well performed. Catch you later, guys.